Good evening. I'm Courtney Graham with the Engagement Department at the Art Institute of Chicago. Welcome to today's virtual walkthrough of the exhibition Monet in Chicago. We're so glad to have you joining us virtually, and while we wish that we could welcome you in person, we hope this digital format can offer a chance to stay connected to the Art Institute from home. We'll begin with a brief review of some of the features we'll be using today. This program will be shared in presentation mode, so we have turned off video and microphones for attendees. For optimal viewing, please select full screen mode under View Options in the top right corner of your screen. You can adjust the size of the video by sliding the separator to the left or right. Throughout the presentation, you're invited to share questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We look forward to answering some of those at the end of the presentation. Closed captions are available and can be turned on via the controls at the bottom of the screen as well. If you encounter any technical difficulties during today's program, again, please let us know in the Q&A and we'll do our best to assist you. This program is being recorded, so if you'd like to revisit it in the future, you'll be welcome to do so. Our speakers today, Gloria Groom, Chair, and David and Mary Winton Green, Curator of Painting and Sculpture of Europe, and Katie Kremnitzer, Research Associate in Painting and Sculpture of Europe, will both be joining us live to answer your questions. But first, we take you into the galleries with our video walkthrough featuring Gloria. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Art Institute of Chicago. My name is Gloria Groom, and I'm the Chair and Curator of Painting and Sculpture of Europe. And it is my greatest pleasure to welcome you to the exhibition, Monet and Chicago. We are in the narthex, that means the very first room. And I love this mural. I love this blow up of about 6 inches of a painting in our collection of the water lilies, which really shows you the drying cracks, the textures, the thickness, all of the things that go into Monet's technique, which we'll be exploring further in the exhibition. Now we're in the collector's room, and this is really important because the history is thanks to these 3 collectors, and Potter Palmer and Annie Swan Coburn. Martin A. Ryerson and his wife Carrie, he was very engaged with the museum. He was a trustee, he was president for a while, and he started collecting Monet around the time of the Columbian World's Fair in the early 1890s. Bertha Palmer and her husband Potter are probably the best known of the collectors that we have in the exhibition. They are, of course, the Palmer House Hotel, but also they were the movers in this painting, Apple Trees in Blossom. It was a painting that came to Chicago as part of the first solo exhibition of the artist at the Art Institute, the first time he was exhibited in a museum in the United States in 1895. And it was purchased by one of the trustees of the Union League Club, who was also involved with the Art Institute. And so from 1895, this painting has been down the street at the Union League Club, and we're delighted to have it here. In this room, we want you to slow down and look at Monet's method. Look at his technique. And to do this, we're offering some of our discoveries made in the lab with our scientists, with our conservators, as we look beneath the surface with X-rays, with infrared. And so we have 2 monitors on 2 very important paintings in our collection, the Beach at San Andres and On the Seine at Benecourt. And we walk you through some of the discoveries that you can't see, or sometimes you can see, with the naked eye. This is Gallery 4, and it's really the Paris Gallery. At this time, Monet had made a little money. He and his wife and 2 children were living in Paris near the Parc Monceau. On this side of the exhibition, we have a number of still lifes, which are exciting for us because we don't think of Monet as a still life artist. He's doing still lifes, one, to be near to home, but also because they're a ready way to make money. To me, this is one of the great discoveries of the exhibition because it's a vertical. You don't think of still lifes as being vertical. And he's showing these the pheasants, the woodcocks, the partridge on the left, birds that were in the area and the locale, but so amazingly painted that they seem to be alive still, even though it's a still life. And the tablecloth also, it just becomes kind of a riverscape. So you're looking at this twittering with energy and myriad strokes of paint making up what seems to be a very simple still life subject matter. So after Camille, his wife's death, Monet moves to various suburbs. He lives in cheaper places, Vautoy. And at that point his life is much more complicated. He's now living with the wife of his former collector, Alice Hocheday, and her 6 children and his 2 children. And so he needs space, and he needs places that are much cheaper than you can find in Paris. And so that's what this room is. It's around Paris. It's the wonderful Ile-de-France, the rolling countryside, the orchards. And over here we have the largest painting, perhaps in the exhibition, besides the water lily paintings. And it is, I don't even know how to describe it. It is a painting in motion. It is as if he tried to capture the atmospheric effects, but for the people as well. And it's so directional and so gestural and so unfinished. And that's what makes it really interesting because it's ambitious. He wanted it to be for something. It shows Alice Hocheday, his soon-to-be wife in 1892, one of his children under this awning outdoors, mixing a family scene, but now out of doors with these crazy awnings, this garish color, and then he just kind of leaves it. Before we leave this room, I'd like to turn back around and look at this vertical, which is always interesting in Monet's work because he doesn't do that many vertical canvases of the boats at Fécamp. And this is a painting that he did in Normandy, but it's also a painting that is a promised gift to the Art Institute. So once again, the generosity of our early collectors continues throughout our history. As you move into this room, the first part of it represents Monet's trip to the south of France, and it's centered on Bordighera, this sun-bleached city in the far distance with the ocean behind it, but then these gnarled trees. And he writes home to Alice Hocheday about how difficult it was, how he struggled to find a place to put his canvas in the midst of all this vegetation. In the second half of this room, you have Monet going back to the Normandy coast where he was so comfortable having grown up there. And you have him working on a kind of theme and variation, often working in pairs, doing a painting with people, without a people, or showing a slightly different viewpoint of the same subject, such as these 2 beach scenes, Etretat on the Normandy coast. And by this time, he was really looking for the non-picturesque. He was looking for that which was more challenging for him and without people. So he'd go to these places at the end of the tourist season when the weather was getting worse, when the wind was picking up and the boats were coming back in. Another serendipitous moment in this exhibition are these 2 paintings of the Normandy coast, the one from the Art Institute, where you see 2 figures at Pourville, and then slightly down the coast, another one almost seems like it's painted the same day with the same sun bleach, the same glaring light. but they're both the palette, the composition, the scale, they're almost as if they were made to be pendants, and yet, of course, they've come in, one from a private collection and one that's been in our collection since 1922. This room really is the 80s, and for Monet, the 80s was a continuation of the many trips away from Giverny, and this is probably one of the most remote and sauvage areas. What makes it so special is his palette of these mauves and purples and acidic greens and yellows on these encrusted hillsides. On the far side of the room are two paintings that seem extraordinarily different from what we've seen, and everything about the looking for landscapes and looking for riverscapes and trying to find motifs in nature, because here we have potted plants. They were actually done with the idea of a commission. And the one we're looking at now with the dahlias was absolutely commissioned by his dealer, Paul Durel, to decorate the doors of his 18th century drawing room. So Monet did a whole series, almost 40 of these for his dealer. But Monet's not really thinking about painting in pots. That's not his thing. He likes to be in nature. So it took him almost 3 years to complete the commission. I think his heart just wasn't in it. But the result is quite glorious. And he is adapting his normal still life practice to something that has to do with decoration and being part of an architectural interior. So, in addition to going to the south of France and the Normandy coast, he went up north to Brittany. And off the coast of Brittany is Belle Ile, the beautiful island. Very much volcanic rock, no beaches whatsoever. Again, the unpicturesque. And these two paintings really speak to how different his technique could be, even when focusing on the same region. The one from the Art Institute collection is the Stillwater Day. And then on the left, you have this wonderful, tumultuous, almost drawing with a paintbrush expression of what it's like when the waves come crashing up against the same types of boulders in the ocean that you see in the calm picture. This may be the last figure painting that Monet did in his career. Certainly, it's the most familial, showing his son Michel with two of the Hochedé children, and in the background, his oldest son Jean with Blanche Hochedé, who he would eventually marry. What makes these children pop is the outlining. They're not simply embedded into the countryside. He's outlined them with this thick yellow and orange paint so that they seem to be sort of cutout figures against the background. And the colors themselves, it's just almost hypnotic. It's mesmerizing, and yet it is a family portrait. One of the tenets of Impressionism was that they had a more direct relationship with nature. Their approach to painting was not to do the preliminary drawings working towards what would be the tableau, the picture, but rather a more direct translation. But of course, Monet started, as all artists do, by sketching. And in this room, you have drawings from his early sketchbook on this wall. And this case, it's an important showcase of the documents that we have that show how big a role Monet has played in our history. And here's the album from the Ryersons that we'll see in the final room of the exhibition, where we show some of the pages of the photo album that Martin and Carrie Ryerson gave to the Art Institute. And the pages we're showing document their visit on June 4th, 1920, to Monet's Giverny home when he went there on the behalf of the Art Institute Board of Trustees thinking he was going to be able to buy 30 Monet paintings on behalf of the museum. But Monet did not take up his offer, and while Ryerson did buy Monet paintings throughout his life, throughout his adult life, that was not the trip. We have what I think are going to be revelatory for many visitors are the early caricatures that he did when he was still living in Normandy, on Le Havre, and he did these for money. So they're the typical big-headed, small-bodied caricatures that you can see now at Montmartre, people doing those, but he was doing them of lawyers and people of importance in the city, but also people that would just pay him 15 to 20 francs. And he quipped later on that, if I had continued doing these, I'd be rich. But it's extraordinary that a young man of 15 or 16 was taking on these rather ambitious drawings. Moving into this room, once again, we have tried to open up to our audience some of the researches that we have done over the years. And this is a truly immersive experience that's a deep dive into three of the most important subjects that Monet worked on at the end of his life: the stacks of wheat, the views of London, and the water lilies. Moving away from the immersive screens, this room is really the Art Institute's crowning glory. It is our 6 stacks of wheat out of the 25 known. 6, we know he showed 15 in 1891. We know that Mrs. Potter Palmer bought 3 in 1891 and 2 more the following year, that she met Monet in 1892. So imagine not only meeting the artist, but understanding what he was trying to do when this was quite new. I mean, they were just done. And the idea of painting the same subject over and over under different climatic conditions was something that really no other artist had done at that time. They look small and kind of mushroom or muffin-like, but they were actually 16 to 20 feet tall. So they were very much a part of the landscape. And that's what he was looking at, but doing something not to show you them as a narrative, but rather as mood-filled, as something that was symbolic of sustenance and the French countryside. The colors that were chosen for this room were to evoke the way these paintings would have looked against the brownish red velvet wall covering in the gallery of Durand-Ruel in May of 1891 when these were on exhibit, in the straight lines that you see them as we've tried to show in this gallery from our collection. This and the room with the monitors are the only 2 rooms in the exhibition where we only feature Art Institute paintings, not integrated with the private collectors. And before leaving the room, you'll see a little drawing, a black chalk drawing by Monet. And as I've said, he didn't use drawings to prepare for paintings, but this is a drawing that was done after a painting in order to be photomechanically reproduced in a magazine that was advertising and reviewing this exhibition in 1891. So it's an after drawing. It's kind of a shock to walk from the stacks of wheat at Giverny into these colossal mountainous paintings of Norway. And in 1895, he went there for just a short period to visit his stepson. And he was struck by, of course, the snow, but also the difference in light, not the buttery yellow light of France, but this colder silvery light of Norway. And so he was in Oslo and he did these Mount Kolsas, which is right outside the city. The London scenes, the London series, which he began in 1899 and completed 3 years later, was introduced in the immersive screen area where you really got the sense of how he changed things. And these paintings are in our collection and they represent just a small amount of the many, many paintings that were done on each of the series: the Charing Cross Bridge, the Waterloo Bridge, and then the Houses of Parliament. What links them together is his interest from his hotel room at the Hotel Savoy in the fog, in the atmosphere, in the dissolving of man-made and architectural structures to make them part of this effervescent and almost ethereal dreamscape. These two paintings, as you're leaving the room, are that wonderful coincidence where they came in from two different private collectors, the Ryerson and the Coburn, and they entered our collection in 1933, not knowing each other, not knowing that they'd be together, but here they are, pendants of Vitoy, the city that he often returned to, really near to Giverny. He lived there and he returned to it for some of his motifs. And again, it's that feeling of dissolving. And this time you get the sense of the city on top of the city. It's a mysterious reflection into the water where it's perfectly divided into the middle between what is real and what is in the shimmery, watery surface. Here you have a perfectly square canvas where he's playing with that decorative effect, but he's obliterated the horizon line, but yet you still get the almost like you folded the canvas in half and you have a mirror image of what you're seeing above the horizon line. It's this feeling of a foggy morning. We know he went out at 5 o'clock and he's somehow translated that fogginess and the sun coming through it with this very limited palette of lavenders and greens and blues and grays. And to me, it's one of the most exquisitely balanced paintings that he ever did. And there's so little to see, and yet it is so thickly painted. So what looks to me, what looks to the eye as if it was something almost watercolor applied, is actually the result of many layers and changes underneath the surface that we know about because we've done a technical analysis. So, this wandering around, this constant search for the next motif will change radically by the end of the 1890s. And that's when he really does dig in and make his home at Giverny. So, in this final room of paintings, it's really celebrating Monet's perhaps what he is most known for, the Water Lily series, which obsesses him from 1899 till the end of his life in 1926. And his property at Giverny, which he moves into in 1890, becomes for him a kind of a palette, becomes his still life. He plants the garden, he reroutes the river so that it goes by his home. He builds the wooden Japanese bridge, and then he proceeds to plant all of the foliage in the water and around the banks. And this amazing, large, encrusted painting called The Irises was purchased by the curator of modern art at the time, the Art Institute, Catherine Koo. She saw the connection between what Monet was doing with these large, immersive, abstract canvases and what was going on in avant-garde art at the time. The three canvases here are perfectly square and where he invokes the play of light, but also the play of what happens when you see the foliage reflected into the water, and you also see the undergrowth that's coming up, and so it makes this wonderful patterned surface. You know, I think the extraordinary aspect of this exhibition is that unlike an exhibition where one starts with a thesis and asks for the works to support that thesis, this was an exhibition that was based on the generosity of our collectors then, which is our collection, and now, which is the collection we're seeing. And the way they speak to each other, these paintings, these works on paper speak to each other, is remarkable. And it also goes to show that Chicago is a city of Monet.
What a wonderful peek into the exhibition. Now I'd like to welcome Katie Kremnitzer, Research Associate in Painting and Sculpture of Europe, to discuss some of the scientific discoveries in the online scholarly catalog. Katie?
Thank you so much, Courtney, and thanks to all of you, of course, for attending this evening. I'm thrilled to tell you a little bit about our online scholarly catalog of paintings and works on paper by Monet in the collection. This is a free digital publication that you can access at the URL on your screen, arctic.edu/Monet. Apologies, this is actually for the exhibition. So the videos that you saw briefly in the walkthrough are all available online, and you can access those videos there. Next slide, please. And this is our online scholarly catalog, which you can access at this link. Each work in the collection has a catalog entry, next slide, that includes both an art historical essay and a technical report. And what's really extraordinary about the reports is that you have these interactive images that allow you to explore the paintings in various lighting conditions. So for example, here in X-ray or in infrared lighting. And what this allows us to do is see compositional changes beneath the surface. For example, those figures on the shore at right and some leisure yachts in the background that Monet ultimately painted out. You can also zoom into the surface of the canvas and see paintings more closely than you can even in the gallery. Here's another view in another manipulated lighting condition that shows us again figures that Monet ultimately painted out of the final composition. He chose instead to focus on these fishermen at left and aspects of the working life of this town that he knew well, having grown up nearby. So throughout the technical report, you have details of the canvas, photographs taken under high magnification that show us interesting details of the tacking edges or even the canvas weave. Of course, brush strokes, as you see there on the upper left, the artist's signature. There's also a full condition report, a frame discussion, the provenance, in other words, the history of the ownership of the painting, exhibition history, and a bibliography. So really something quite fun to explore at home. Next slide, please. And of course, an exhibition is always the product of extraordinary teamwork, and this was no different given the extraordinary circumstances under which the exhibition was installed and opened. And this is just a small view of some of the colleagues at the Art Institute that helped bring this exhibition to fruition. So of course, we thank them a great deal. Next slide. And here is one shot of the exhibition with all of you in it at a safe distance. The exhibition is on view until June 14th, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that in some closing remarks. But as you can see, it's really a lovely experience to be in the galleries now and take in this exhibition while you can. So with that, I think we may turn to questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. The scholarly catalog is such a rich resource for people to explore. I'd also like to welcome Gloria Groom, the chair, and David and Mary Winton Green, curator of Painting and Sculpture of Europe, to join us now for questions from the audience. Hello, Gloria.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Yeah.
Good evening. So we have a lot of questions, a number of which relate to and praise the paint colors of the exhibition walls, especially the deep blue, and wondering if there's a name of that color, and in general, what kind of discussions go into choosing the colors for the gallery walls.
That's my favorite subject. So I'm so happy you're starting with it. Polo blue is the one that we have twice in the exhibition. And the one at the very end for the watercolors, these are Benjamin Moore. So this is not magic or anything. It's called Salamander, and we just love it. We think it really brings out, I mean, you can't go wrong with Monet, but you could. I think you could if you put him on white walls. And no, we had so much fun choosing the colors with Michael Darling, who was our designer at the time. What was tricky about this exhibition is that Katie and I never got to have that moment where we go in the galleries and we look at stripes of different colors that we might choose. and to see how they work. So because of COVID, because we were home and the painting was going on while we weren't there, it was a surprise for us, and fortunately a happy surprise.
I will say we were lucky to have half of the exhibition in our permanent collection galleries. So there was a day or two, Gloria, I remember well when we were holding up painted squares to see how it all looks. And
We walked around with
that's
painted
beautifully.
squares in our collection, so we knew that. But the lighting is so different in our permanent collection galleries, so you never really know when you have 15 and a half high walls in the Regenstein galleries how it's going to how it's going to translate. But it did. We're happy.
That's actually a great segue to the next question about the permanent collection and how many works by Monet are in the permanent collection. Could you talk a little about that?
Sure. We have 33 paintings and we have 13 works on paper, including those 10 caricatures that were shown in the video. And the drawing I showed, the drawing that we looked at that had the stacks of wheat that was done for a publicity, an article, and 2 other drawings. So it's a substantial collection. And what makes it special is that it began so early, that the collectors were in 1890, 91, 92. So that's what distinguishes our collection from the Met, for example, or from Boston, is the quantity that was already in Chicago early on.
And what's exciting is we have a promised gift that will bring us up to 34 total paintings, which, not to gloat, but Chicago has the largest collection of works by Monet of any museum in the country, outside of Paris, in the world, in fact, outside
Right.
of Paris.
And I don't remember in the video, I may have said this, sorry to repeat, but only 2 of our 33 paintings, and now soon to be at some point 34, were actually purchased. The others were all gifts. So when we say Monet's in our DNA, we super mean that.
Wonderful. This question asks about the water lily paintings and why some appear potentially unsigned or they have a seemingly different style of signature.
Yes, well, I'll talk about that, and Katie, we can. Um, there, there are some in the gallery that are unfinished, and when they're unfinished, they have a stamp rather than a signature. Monet would sign his works, especially the times he was working on the water lilies in this large studio. He would sign them when they went out, and he liked to say that he liked that Americans especially liked for him to sign it while they were watching him. So he'd finish up the corner and sign it at the same time. But the ones that were left in his studio and that were sold through his son and through dealers in the 1950s are all stamped. So anything that was left, the hundreds of paintings that were left in his studio are stamped.
And I think that's probably what accounts for the difference in appearance between the signatures, ones that are done in paint and others that are stamped posthumously in ink.
Yeah, and especially in that last gallery, it's very interesting when you have the 3 large mural-like water lilies. You see that he's kind of left the right lower corner unfinished, and that's where it's stamped. And if he was on there was one that he finished up, and so he finished that corner and then signed his name. So he had his little ways of thinking about what was finished and what was ready to go out to the public.
Great. And somewhat related, this question, references Monet's vision loss near the end of his life and wondering if that is evident in some of his later works in the brushwork or in his use of color. Could you talk a little about that?
I can start, Katie. In our exhibition, it's not so apparent. There are some very, very garish, I would say, reds and greens, very dark colors for the water lilies that we don't anticipate. And we think that those were done when he was suffering from cataracts, and he did have an operation. And we know that he laid out his colors, that his tubes of paint, so he could remember, and he'd been painting for 5 to 6 decades by that time. But there is something about these later paintings that are not presented in our exhibition, but that make you think he may have had some color issues. But then he did have one eye operated on, and so the color issue went away, but he was then seeing double because the other eye wasn't aligned with the eye that had been operated on. So I'm not so certain any of that makes a difference for Monet, because again, he's painting largely from memory by this time as well as observation, but he knows what he's doing. He knows how to make a painting, and he knows what colors he's using for his gardening. So it's tricky. What do you think, Katie? I mean, it's like one of those things, we can't answer it. He didn't
Yeah.
say, I can't see.
Right. There was an exhibition in the last few years, although time feels escapable, but that explored Monet's last years. And I think this question of a late style, or, the last decade of Monet's career, gained interest really in the 1950s. And of course now is a subject of great interest. But it's true that none of the paintings in the show, I think, are really evidence to the fact that he was struggling with, assimilating color or seeing properly.
Because his goal was harmony. That was one of the big mantras of his approach to painting. And I think in the exhibition that we're presenting, for whatever reasons, because it's private collections plus our collection, so it's not exactly that we went out and chose certain paintings. There is a real overall harmony, and there are paintings in his late career that do not evidence that.
Great, thank you. We had a couple questions about the frames and wondering if any of the paintings were reframed for the exhibition, and in general, how frames are chosen.
I love that question too. The answer is none of the paintings were reframed for the exhibition. We were very fortunate that the private collectors had frames that were either of the period or that seemed to work and that don't completely distract from the painting. And that's what you always want. I mean, I think if we had had velvet liners and pink frames, this would have been a different experience for some people. And we wouldn't ask for someone to reframe their painting unless it was completely off. We have reframed a number of our Monet paintings because we've learned by looking at other Monets at the Met, at Boston. We know what frames that Durand-Ruel, his dealer, would have put on them at the time in the 1890s, early 20th century. And so when a frame is completely off that chronological, it doesn't even look like it belongs, we have reframed them. So we've reframed all of the stacks of wheat, for example. That was more to make them look more serial, more sequential. So he loved Louis XIII frames, so we chose a molding that is similar to what we know he would have liked to have had on them.
And we do have several original Durand-Ruel frames, which is really unbelievable. And again, all of the works in our collection that are featured on the online scholarly catalog have a narrative bit on frames. So if you're interested in frames or stamps on the back of canvases or a thread count, it's all available online, which is really an unbelievable contribution to Monet scholarship and scholarship on Impressionism in general.
You can see that Katie and I are really hoping you will, after this, do a deep dive into the catalog and play with it, because there is so much information. We brought some to this exhibition because we wanted to make it accessible, but we're hoping it's a teaser for you to try it out at home.
Yes, and we do have a technical question. You mentioned that in some instances, figures he may have painted over were shown, and wondering if you found any big surprises when looking at any of the works in the exhibition.
Works that in our collection we've looked at very carefully. So the surprises we've known about, and we talk about them in this online scholarly catalog. We found organic matter in one of our field paintings. So we know that it proves he was out of doors. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing you want to find. In the works that have come to us, I think there were just surprises because there were a couple of works that we had not seen for whatever reasons. And we were just surprised by the surface because the thing about photography, unless you do the kind of micrographs that we've done, you it flattens it out. You can never see the textures. You can never see how extraordinarily worked a lot of these paintings are. So I don't know. I don't think we had any uber surprises of the ones coming in, did we, Katie?
Not of things coming in, and I don't know that these were surprises, but I would say that we have new visual evidence for changes Monet was making as he was painting. So for example, in some of our stacks of wheat, one in particular, he changed not only the number of stacks in the final composition, but also the season. And those kinds of changes are things we can see, as Gloria was saying, using either images, looking at the painting under magnification or in manipulated light to see beneath it, just like when you go to the doctor and get an x-ray to look inside. We can do that for the paintings and see what's going on underneath. So no surprises, which maybe was a good thing in the end, but definitely some revelations and exciting technical discoveries that confirmed things we already thought were probably happening.
We have a question about whether Ryerson purchased these paintings for his home or if they were purchased specifically for the museum. Could you talk a little about that?
That's a really good question. I mean, he was so involved as a trustee and later vice president. So he was lifetime really engaged. But I mean, he lived with these paintings. And I think that we have a photograph of his wife's bedroom where you see the water lilies. So I think it's a combination. They did not have children. He felt very strongly in the importance of making sure that the Art Institute was the best institution. And he didn't only collect Impressionism. He collected medieval, he collected decorative arts, he collected in many, many different areas. So I think he loved the idea of the pursuit and having a wonderful collection, but probably at some point it became apparent that this was going to be the museum's collection as well.
Thank you, Gloria. I think we have time for one more. And this person asks if you could choose one Monet painting to take with you to a desert island, which would it be for each of you?
You go first, Katie.
Well, definitely not the fruit, I guess. He's so hungry. I think one of the water lilies, probably because you can just look at them forever. Sounds cheesy, but it's true.
No, it is true. And the other day, I mean, the crazy thing is that this exhibition is the longest running exhibition in Regenstein, although not consecutively. And so I've gone in there, I don't even know how many times, a lot. And Saturday I was there and I saw the koi fish in one of the water lilies. It's just, it's in the largest one in the room. And it just, all of a sudden you see these orange slashes and you realize that that's what's coming from the water. It's under the surface and you're just seeing these wonderful, and that I think I'm finding so much more in those. And so like Katie said, I think any one of those are just met for meditation. And I think if I was on an island, I would just, need to do that.
Nice cool pond with water
Yeah.
lilies sounds nice. Yes. Well, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us for this walkthrough of Monet in Chicago. Of course, the exhibition is on view through June 14th. So if you can, we hope that you get a chance to visit the show in its final days. For more information on upcoming virtual events, please visit us online at artic.edu and look for our monthly e-news in your inboxes. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.